punk has been like one of the best kept secrets in the world, and we sort of went around and blabbed to everybody about it. So.
Under the Russian chaps now lifted on his bill. It makes me wonder why I'm still. But something dreams and bitch now, feeling like I am, and I'm never gonna go. Pay attention to the breakthroughs and the broken neck. Some call it slum, some call it hate. I wanna take that through always said I'd like to call my head. Welcome to paradise.
From the industrial California town of Rodeo, across the East Bay, childhood friends Billy Joe Armstrong, Mike Dirnt, and Trey Cool grew up on a diet of 60s Britbeat bands like The Kinks, The Who, and all things punk rock, from the high-speed pop-flex songs of the Ramones and Buzzcocks through to the burgeoning hardcore movement of the early 80s. They were a punk band irrevocably in love with pop music, and they were about to sell millions of albums with this punk-pop hybrid, a sound that would soon define the 1990s.
I think there's nothing not listenable to on that album.
A band needs to make that kind of record if they want to be large.
For Green Day, the time's right. People looking for a band that sounded like that. They had the money and the promotion to make sure everyone knew he was there, and he sold.
Timothy, can you hear me laughing?
I'd say 3/4 of the songs from Dookie you can just bang, you can just hear them, recognise them in a few seconds. Now that is a mark of class.
I just knew that I had gotten into something far bigger than I ever imagined before, and that nothing was going to be the same again anymore.
Pay attention to the crazy jam, the broken note. Some call it sludge, some call it hate. I wanna take it through always said I like to call my own. Welcome to paradise.
Hey, we are the best. We are the best, but you know, hey, we don't want to go floating, and you know, some things are best unsaid.
It all started when two 11-year-old friends, Billy Joe Armstrong and Mike Pritchard, met one day in the school canteen. The two friends had been playing their songs at home for a couple of years, when in 1987, they decided to recruit a drummer for their garage band. His name was John Kiffmeyer, but everyone knew him as Al Sobrante. Together, the three teens became Sweet Children, a tongue-in-cheek moniker lifted from their song of the same name.
They came out of the whole kind of punk club scene. Punk really started in America with things like the Stooges, and over here we know punk as the Sex Pistols, but they came out very much from the American end of it, which was sort of punk put through the rock and roll sausage machine. So they were a lot more American sounding, although they later claimed to sort of have the Pistols and the Damned and all these British bands as their main influence. Actually, they really couldn't be from anywhere but America.
In the earliest days of Sweet Children, the trio began hanging around the recently opened all-ages punk rock venue, 924 Gilman Street in the East Bay. The Gilman scene was a place where young punk fans could hang out and form bands, start record labels, or fanzines. A close-knit community that prided itself on its punk ethics.
A whole bunch of us built it from scratch, you know, like took jackhammers to the floor and busted it up and put it in the toilets, built the stage, put in the wiring. I almost electrocuted myself doing that, and started putting on shows, and it flourished. It was amazing, one of those miracles that actually happens, and it's still going today, like 19 years later.
A lot of people felt like there was all this local talent that didn't have any place to play. And by having this place suddenly that people were able to create, A lot of people came out of the woodwork. A lot of people that had been around were able to focus on that. And it had, and still has, a kind of unifying effect. You know, people have affection for the place.
The Gilman Street was great because there's a sense of community. There wasn't like you'd be based over in England and there'd be no community at all. There was a strong punk rock community, and because it's a very ethical punk rock club, there's a real sense of identity to it, and there's a very sense of lifestyle to it. It must have been fantastic. I mean, it's still going, Gilman Street. It's a really cool venue.
When Green Day formed in 1987, no one, least of all the members, expected to make a living out of it. The band caught the eye of local label Lookout, whose founder, Larry Livermore, had seen the band playing at a party and had likened them to the early Beatles.
I remember Billy especially stood out. I mean, they put on the show of their life. It was as if, I said right there, it was like the Beatles at Shea Stadium. He had that same attitude, that same command, as if he were playing to 60,000 people. You know, kind of a mixture of affection and disdain. You know, he was already a rock star, even though it was just like these 5 kids sitting on the floor, you know, and at the same time, he was really warm and inclusive. You know, he like talked to them and said, "Thanks for coming, and I really appreciate you being here." It was just, you know, before it was 2 or 3 songs into it, I said, well, I'm going to make a record with these guys. And I told him so when Billy asked me afterwards, you know, kind of in his like shy 16-year-old way, well, what'd you think? Were we all right? And I says, I want to make a record with you guys. And he says, oh, okay. And that was the beginning.
In November 1988, Sweet Children made the leap from audience to stage when they began performing at Gilman regularly.
And they became like the house band there. They'd always be the first on. They were just like little kids, 15, 16 years old. First band on every single bill. Virtually they're playing there for like every night, really. That's how they got their chops together. And they just played there, built up a following there. I mean, they're part of all that kind of late 80s California kind of punk scene, bands like Operation Ivy, who became Rancid. So those kind of bands played there as well. And Green Day got kind of friends all these people. So you can see a little infrastructure build up.
And they started to play Gilman a lot and developed quite a following. And maybe by the end of '89, they played quite a lot of shows, and they were starting to get a reputation as a band that a lot of girls liked. And that was, among some of the punks, that was kind of supposed to be a bad thing, because if all the girls came from the suburbs and stood up front and danced and sort of looked dreamy-eyed at the band, then that meant you were a sellout or a poser. And so some of the more hardcore punks were sneering at them, making fun of them. But, you know, the band didn't seem to mind.
Livermore agreed to finance the high schoolers' earliest recordings. The 1,000-hour single, recorded cheaply and quickly, and released in 1989.
They went in and recorded 4 songs, and then it came up down to about 3 weeks before the record was due to be released in April of 1989. And there's still no artwork for the cover. We had a bunch of 7-inch records, but no covers, no lyrics, no title, nothing. And then they came to me and said, well, we decided to change our name, and we want to call ourselves Green Day. And I went, no, you can't do that. That's crazy. Everybody knows you as Sweet Children. By everybody, I mean the maybe 500 or 1,000 people we were hoping might buy the record. And he says, well, it's too late. We've decided, you know, Sweet Children's dumb, and it's too much like Sweet Baby, which was another Gilman band. And I said, well, we don't. How can we do this? And he said, well, we'll just do it. And I learned then there was a couple of the bands I worked with. You know, there was no point in arguing with. They would decide, and they would announce it to the label, and that was that. And so, although I said Green Day is a stupid name, it doesn't mean anything, and so on and so on. We stuck to it, and at the last minute. My partner in the label at that time, David Hayes, just sort of drew a logo for Green Day and said, well, we'll call it by the name of the first song on the record, 1,000 Hours. And I went off to the copy shop and Xeroxed 1,000 sheets of paper with that on it and folded them up and stuck them into a plastic bag with each record. And that was their first record. It came out in early April of '89, 1,000 Hours.
Here we go again.
We pressed 1,000 of the first 7-inch, and it kind of built up fairly slowly. I think it probably only sold a few hundred at first, and then over the course of the year probably sold out its first pressing of 1,000, and then picked up quite a bit.
Soon the band were recording their full-length debut album, 39 Smooth, over one weekend in San Francisco.
That came out in April of 1990, and that's when we first knew that something big was happening. When we did a record release party in April of 1990 at Gilman, and it was not just for Green Day, it was for another band, sort of a more metallic rock type band called Neurosis, who were pretty big at the time. And when we got there, we were one of the kids that was working with me and I. We arrived at the gig with a whole boxes of records to sell, and I was driving, and Chris, who was with me, said, "Holy cow! Look at this, Larry!" And I looked up, and they were queued up all the way down the street. There was 500, 800 people standing outside and waiting to get into Gilman for just like a Lookout Records release show. It was pretty mind-blowing. I mean, honestly, because we knew things had been building up, but not to that extent. And we were selling records hand over fist to the point where we had no place to put the money anymore. It was like about 3 a.m. We were driving back, and we were still like keep finding, like, you know, where we'd stuff more wads of money into this pocket and that pocket, and we'd sold out every single record we'd brought to that gig. It was hard to believe that like something we'd started had turned into this. It was almost kind of scary.
The first album, Green Day, it sounds like a band fully formed. The songwriting is there. It's just a production which isn't quite as good. But of course it wouldn't be, because the band haven't got as much money. They haven't played as many gigs, and they're young, you know. So, but if you took those songs and re-recorded them with the budgets they had later on, 5 years later, a lot of those songs will fit into any of those albums.
It seems to be full of songs about girls. I think there's like only two other tracks on there that don't talk about some kind of angst relationship with girls.
You can't expect 15, 16, 17-year-olds to write these great, you know, 3 verses on the deconstructing the political situation in America. I mean, it is about spots, boys and girls, and fart jokes. I mean, that's basically where you're at when you're 15 or 16, and Green Day were kind of mirroring that very well.
It's pretty badly written. The musicianship is quite poor. The drumming is all over the place. But then again, I suppose it's punk music, and in fact it's probably the most punky that they ever sound.
They've come from 1987 Sweet Children EP down to 39 Smooth in 1990, and they've made quite, you know, there's been quite a growth within the band, and it is kind of quite a mixed bag, but there's enough in it to kind of hint what the band will become.
Can we find a way so that you can stay?
All was going well until John decided to give up the pursuit of punk stardom in favor of a college education. This would turn out to be the crucial turning point in Green Day's career, when they hooked up with fellow Gilman graduate Frank Edwin Wright III, better known as Tré Cool, a precocious and hyperactive drummer with local band The Lookouts. Though Tré came from the remote mountain town of Willits, by his mid-teens, he was already a fixture on the Berkeley punk scene with a reputation as a promising drummer and a nose for mischief. He was the perfect candidate to fill the vacant Green Day drum stool.
Sit around and watch the tube, but nothing's on.
He had joined the band at the end of 1990 after our band kind of sputtered out. and say it did create a new sound. I mean, John was a good drummer, but not a great drummer. He was competent, and he had a lot of energy and spirit. But Trey, by this time, had become, you know, a genuinely great drummer, and it was a new level of performance that the band was capable of now.
So in 1991, with Trey on board, they recorded their second album, Kerplunk, their first as the Green Day lineup we know today. The album showcased Billy Joel's talent for writing songs that combine the melodies of British bands of the 60s with the energy of 70s punk rock and 80s hardcore.
In those days, we often would take the tape down to Los Angeles to have it mastered. And I liked to go down because there was this engineer guy who'd been doing it since the 60s, and it was almost as much just because I get to sit around with him and hear stories about Frank Sinatra and Frank Zappa and all of the other, and the Beach Boys and all these other bands he'd worked with. And he'd just sit there and tell stories while he was doing the settings on our tapes. And then at the end, he'd give me a cassette, and I'd listen to it on the way back home. And I got onto the plane and put it on a Walkman, and the minute the first chords kicked in, I just said, whoa, this is something way bigger than I had ever expected. It was the first song, I think it was 2,000 Light Years Away on the first song on Kerplunk. I mean, I'd heard it a bunch of times before, but now that it was mastered and ready to become a record, I just knew that I had gotten into something far bigger than I'd ever imagined before, and that nothing was going to be the same again anymore. And it wasn't. It was the beginning of quite a wild ride.
Kerplunk is it's actually a good record, really. I mean, the band have learned to play their instruments. They've got Trey Cool in. I think he just totally tightens up the rhythm section, and basically the band seem as though they've travelled, they've done the gigging circuit, and they've listened to their original recording, and they've just really stepped up. You know, as a result, the album Kerplunk just sounds far more together.
It shows a tighter band. I think they're playing better off of each other and with each other, and you know, they're functioning more as a band, and also their style is a little more fixed now, whereas with 39 Smooth it was a bit more mixed up with different things. Kerplunk is definitely a Green Day sort of album. It's still recorded in the same kind of trashy way as the first one. There's songs like Welcome to Paradise is on there, and I think that song is definitely the first time we see a little sparkle of what the next sort of album would bring.
Yeah, Welcome to Paradise on there, which is like the first Green Day kind of mini classic, really. It's a song which they still play live now and then. And it's a song they've re-released later on. And it's a great song. It's got all the hallmarks, everything's got like big hits then later on. And 2,000 Light Years Away was on there as well, which is another really good track. But the songwriting across the whole album is again really, really good, really, really strong. And there's a little slight bit of diversification on there. It's not all just straight pop punk. There's a couple of other instruments chucked into the mix and things. Well,
there's a lot less songs about girls and relationships and angsty stuff like that. I think Billy Joe actually starts getting into lyric writing, which is perhaps what we associate more with Green Day, which is the kind of more of the mental turmoil. He seems to write more songs about his brain and things like that, and that obviously becomes quite a sort of trademark for Dookie later. Kerplunk actually needed to happen before they could realistically get signed to a bigger label. They needed to stick their head up above their competition and actually sound like a band with potential.
With proper digs in the basement at 2243 Ashby Street, the guys were now living, eating, and breathing as one band. The band had little in the way of money and did the odd menial job to get by between playing increasingly bigger tours.
There's this kind of period from about 1990 to 1992. I always wondered how they survived. I mean, I was paying them regular royalties from their record sales, which was a help, but it wasn't enough to live on. And their lifestyle was pretty chaotic. I mean, they were a bunch of kids who just left home and had never lived on their own before. And I knew that while John was still in the band, he was the one that took care of all the money and making sure they got up in time to get to the gig. And he was kind of the mum of the band, really. And once he was gone, though, I mean, and he was replaced with Trey. I mean, Trey was the most chaotic of all. So I would stop and think sometimes, well, how are they paying their bills? Who's taking care of the money? I mean, how is this working?
When we started our band, we never thought in a million years that we would end up where we are right now, because it was anyone before us, it never happened. So, but it's like I always just try to treat it just, another day, and I just don't even think about it, just having a good time and doing what we feel is right,
One of the things that was always endearing about them is they were excited just to play. They didn't really worry too much about, in fact, they didn't worry about money at all, or fame, or records. It was kind of partly my job to get them to concentrate long enough to make a record. Because they were, as long as there was a gig to play, and if they weren't playing, they would be probably sitting around jamming on their guitars. They were happy.
Welcome to
It was kind of me that, I think, in a way, that kept going at them and saying, look, people are really buying the record, people really like you, you can be serious about this. And they were kind of like, I don't want to be that serious, I want to have fun.
It was live that Green Day built their reputation, playing everywhere and anyway, including in 1991, a hectic European tour that saw the band playing everywhere from squats to snooker halls.
It was all like sort of very kind of hand-to-mouth touring. It was like little clubs, in a van. Some kids here from the UK were driving them. They weren't making any money, but they were paying their own way, and which was good, because they didn't have any other jobs, and they had, as long as they stayed on the road, they had a place to sleep and they had something to eat, and I think that was kind of their attitude.
I did see them on the first tour, but they weren't really that known. I mean, I remember seeing them. There was about 30 people at the gig in Newport, Wales, and they were great. But again, it was you couldn't really place them into the scene, because we're in a very kind of Nirvana kind of esque, pre-Nirvana, getting massive era. But it's all that kind of things going on there. There's grunge going on. There's no space for pop punk in Britain then. It wasn't really kind of a known scene. So yeah, you kind of seen. But when you see them then playing then, it's not really a massive different show to what they do now. It's still like goofing about, great songs without just there wasn't 14,000 people watching it.
That carried on well into 1992, but by that time some of the gigs were starting to get pretty big, and they were starting to make some serious money. Still mostly DIY gigs, but when you get 500 or 600 kids turning up, that can turn into some serious money. I mean, by their standards.
on word of mouth alone, 39 Smooth and Kerplunk had notched up sales of 50,000 copies each, and it was clear they needed some help taking care of their business affairs.
Lookout was a very small label. For a label operating at the level that Lookout was, to sell 50,000 copies was really pushing the limits of what they could do. And I know that Green Day were going out on tour at that point, maybe 91 or 92, I think 93. They weren't able to find the records in stores. Their distribution wasn't that great, and Lookout really didn't help them to book shows. They needed a more professional way of doing things than they had been. I think they realized that they'd gotten a little too big to just do it themselves.
They were one of the bands that didn't take a lot of hands-on energy. I mean, the main thing I had to do was keep the records pressed, write them their checks. We paid the bands quarterly, and I had to keep them paid and answer questions. Really, like they'd say, "How's that work?" or "What are we going to do here?" And I would tell them. Sometimes I didn't, as they toured more and more, I didn't see them as much as I used to. I mean, they used to be they'd just drop by and hang out, and now sometimes I wouldn't see them for a month or two at a time. And that continued on into '93, and it was in '93 when the rumors started really flying that, the majors are interested in them.
They chose two attorneys, Elliot Kahn and Jeff Saltzman, who had previously represented bands such as Mudhoney, Primus, and the Melvins. They got to work touting the band's latest demo to all the major record labels.
I think it must have been sometime in the spring of '93. The rumors really started flying, and people just started asking me, "What are you going to do now if you don't have Green Day?" And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about it. They haven't told me, and I haven't even seen them for about 3 or 4 weeks." And then I ran into Trey, and I said, "What's going on? I hear all these stories." And he kind of hemmed and hawed, which was unlike Trey. Usually he's, they called him Motor Mouse, and he, a mile a minute talking about everything. And he just was kind of, obviously, but I'd known him since he was 9 years old. He couldn't, get away with that too long. So he finally said, "Well, we're talking to this management kind of agency." And I says, "Oh, well, were you planning on telling me? And why don't you get the other guys and we'll talk about it?" And so we went down to a nearby cafe, and it quickly came out that they weren't just talking, that they'd pretty much already signed a deal with these two management guys who had mostly worked with metal bands before, like Exodus and The Possessed, things like that, who kind of knew nothing about the scene, but who had promised to get them a major label deal.
This is off one of our records that no one has. When I was younger, thought that the world struggled around me. But in time, I realized I was so wrong.
I mean, I'd seen a lot of bands by that time signed to major labels on the basis of having sold 10 or 20,000 records. The majors would, put out a record. If it didn't sell a lot, they'd be dropped, and they'd be history, just like that. And I thought it would be a real tragedy if that happened to them. But as it turned out, they proved to be the exception. The 1 out of 100 that hit it big right from the start.
The band quickly found themselves the subject of a bidding war that ended when they decided to sign with Reprise Records A&R man and producer Rob Cavallo. Signing to a major label created division in the punk scene that had spawned Green Day. Some critics claiming the band had sold out and could never be credible again. Others recognized the new opportunities and financial backing available to a band who had always applied a pop sensibility to songwriting. So what difference did it make?
Green Day were destined to be going around in ever-decreasing circles, playing to their fan base. But the moment they signed to a major label, that was their that was their chance to really dive into the spotlight.
I think they knew how good they were. I mean, they've always been fairly confident bands, but I think they were sat down when they were writing these songs thinking, well, why not? We can have hits with these. Lookout can't do it. It was nothing down on Lookout. I mean, Lookout was a good, big underground label, but to get right to mainstream these days, it's not the 1970s anymore. This is the 90s. You had to deal with the monster to get into the mainstream. So they did the right thing. They signed to major. They could have signed to Epitaph, who's becoming the biggest punk label of the lot at the time. But the way Billy Joe says it, why should I go from one independent label to another bigger independent label? That's an insult to Lookout. You know, if you're going to leave Lookout, go to the biggest label you possibly can, and that's what he did.
Independent labels give you a lot of credibility, but ultimately the reality means you're not going to get played on radio or on mainstream radio. You're not going to get played on TV, and you're not going to get cool critics talking about you, because ultimately, in simple terms, people aren't going to hear about it.
Being signed to a large label like Reprise would mean that suddenly they were able to have the budget, have the studio time, have the distribution sources in place, you know, be able to sort of look at Europe and generally have the support of a massive commercial business behind them.
If you're on an indie label selling 50,000 records, you know, maybe you go to a major label and sell twice that many. You're considered a failure in major label standards, but you'd be a huge indie band. But if you're going to sell 10 million records, yeah, sign with the major label, but you can't predict that.
Do you have the time to listen to me whine?
Armed with a number of new compositions, Green Day enter Berkeley's Fantasy Studios to begin work on their breakthrough album Dookie, with their equally young A&R man Rob Cavallo producing. Though they are now entering the arena of the major label rock band, the plan was a simple one, to keep on doing what they did best. And for Green Day, that involved penning short, sharp, melodic songs about the subjects both they and their audience knew about: sexual frustration, boredom, poverty, and angst. But rather than being downbeat, Green Day's approach was one of energy, humor, and excitement.
Well, when Dookie came out, the whole thing had changed. You know, you've got like rock's gone mainstream. You know, the Nirvana kicked open the doors. There's a huge space, people listening, and there's like a big grunge scene. But I think a lot of people picked up Nirvana because they actually like the punk rock edge of Nirvana. They liked it because it was energetic. A lot of the grunge bands are actually pretty dull. You know, they're pretty boring.
I thought a lot of the grunge bands were nothing but arena rock bands, but they haven't washed their hair. They were boring. It was all introverted, and it really didn't say anything.
I think lyrically people picked up on the you're not a macho rock star, you're just a kid getting kicked about kind of thing. And I think Green Day picked up, didn't copy those lyrics, they're writing those kind of lyrics anyway. The kind of the small town loser, I'm not, I'm the spotty kid, sod you kind of lyrics, which Nirvana wrote, it's kind of introspective, but Green Day did a lot more humour, probably a little less depth. And those kind of things hit a nerve.
There was all of these sort of grunge bands. You know, there was, the Pearl Jams and the Soundgardens, and I just felt like we were a wrecking ball that was ready to just destroy the house that grunge built.
I wouldn't say they tapped into the zeitgeist in the way that Nirvana did, but what I think Green Day did was actually give voice to the concerns and habits of what their fans were into, and that's a clever trick.
Welcome to paradise.
And Green Day wrote fun songs about quite light topics most of the time, I would say. So actually kids could bounce around, listening to their records. And they were exciting sounding records. So the vibe that came off of those records, you could almost smell it.
And I'm never gonna go. Pay attention to the veterans and the broken men.
You write the songs, you record them, 3 months later a record comes out, then you're out taking over the world, hopefully.
Welcome to paradise.
The band worked quickly and easily. The bulk of Dookie had been written by Billy Joe Armstrong during time off the road in 1993 in his basement Berkeley flat, surrounded by empty beer cans, clothes, and broken equipment. Welcome to Paradise was the song that bridged the gap between the scuzzy teen punks of old with the newly wealthy major label recording stars. A live favorite, the song was the highlight of their previous Lookout album, Kerplunk, and deemed too good to resign to the past.
Welcome to Paradise was very significant in terms of the development of the band, because it was actually probably the first Green Day song that anyone heard that addressed anything more than teenage angst and, you know, the issues of a teenager growing up in America.
Timothy, can you hear me laughing? It's been take so much since that I have looked around.
And while it wasn't exactly what you would call a political song, it was about as political as they got at that time.
Now feeling like I am, think I'm never gonna go. Pay attention to the crazy jam, the broken note. Some call it slugs of falling lead. I wanna take it through a wasteland I like to call my own. Welcome to Paradise.
If you compare the single, what I thought of as a single for Kerplunk, Welcome to Paradise, you can actually compare those two mixes, and what Rob Cavallo does to it is what it's all about in taking a band up to that level where you're going to hawk them around the world. If you listen to that track, every part of the drum take is absolutely spot on, and every single part of the vocal take and the guitar takes, and they're all absolutely spot on. And it's not really a major secret. If you do all of that, then you end up with a far more polished product, and that's generally what the public respond to.
Green Day's policy had always been to develop their songs to such a degree that recording was quick and uncomplicated, an approach born out of punk's DIY attitude. This worked well on their first album with Lookout, Kerplunk. The record sounded great with pared-down production that comes when there's little budget. And now, despite the backing of a commercial record company, Billy Joe laid down all his vocals for Dookie in the space of 2 days. His work amounted to 16 songs. Some of those that made it onto the album were recorded in the first take. The band had entered their most productive period yet.
I think Green Day were inspired by what you call the original punk bands. I just think no one else knew it apart from them. You know, I think if you actually spoke to them, they would say they were inspired by the Ramones and the Sex Pistols. But it was very much a kind of safe and homogenized version of it. It didn't have that kind of element of danger about it. But ultimately, you know, they recorded Dookie, as far as I know, in a few days. That's pretty punk rock.
I mean, I remember Trey coming around and saying, well, we've been working on my drum sounds for 6 weeks now, or something like that. I mean, I might be exaggerating slightly, but, you know, we were used to recording albums in 2 or 3 days. And that's how we'd done both of them. Their first one was done in a day and a half, and their second one, I think, took 4 days. And they spent the whole summer, I don't know, and more doing that record.
There was no excess fat in a Green Day song, so it was very much, don't bore us, get to the chorus. They said everything they needed to say in 2 or 3 minutes, which is exactly what the punk bands did.
Though the songs emerging from the studio were filled with all the anxiety and insecurities of adolescence, they were also possessed with sheer energy and lust for life. The opener, Burnout, said it all. All in all, the energy of Dookie was pure punk rock, but this is punk rock with a difference. It was music to be played on radios the world over.
They were perfectly comfortable. This was like something that they'd been getting ready for all their life, and it was all happening and it was all unfolding. You know, kind of in the same way that I said that, like when Billy was playing to those 5 kids in that shack, I mean, it was like he was already on stage at a stadium playing like to 60,000 people. It was that same kind of feeling. He had been ready all his life to walk into this big studio and make this big record. So no, they were having the time of their life on that record, and I think it shows through. I mean, the songs are all classic Green Day. The performances are perfect. I mean, I think they loved making that record, and I talked to them many times afterwards, and they were always very happy with it.
In a kind of successful band's history, the bands that kind of go on and move on and to become stellar really, at some stage or other, are going to do a record like, in Green Day's case, Dookie. And what's interesting about that is that you hear Rob Cavallo, who produces that record, hearing perhaps how the band can sound and recognising that, you know, it's all about the guitars.
I'm taking this sound and I'm blowing it up to major label quality, but I'm not going to bastardize or change the sonic quality of it, because we have to have that integrity.
We wanted to really capture the energy of what we do live. We wanted a record to reflect who we were as a band. You know, $500 recording that style and put it on a big budget with more time and more time to get bigger sounds.
I remember them as being like a total learning experience. It was like we were going to college every day, to some extent.
We showed up at like 12 noon every day, and we left at like 12 or 1 o'clock every night, and we made sure that we got great takes.
When it's produced that way, it almost kind of softens it a little bit. It gives it that sort of lighter feel. But it's a strange one, because Green Day have always had sort of good harmonies and melodies and stuff, so that in itself would add a lighter feel to it. So it was, I think it was bound to be a great record and a lighter record. So what the production has done in this case, which is obviously a sign of good production, is just let it be what it is.
It was the kind of music they'd been playing for years, and it was a chance to play it in an excellent studio with an excellent producer and to a huge audience. I mean, it was just, everything was in place, and I think they were having the time of their life. I think they loved it.
I was alone. I was all by myself. No one was looking. I was thinking of you.
Though the band were making a career-defining record, their entire existence was based on fun and frivolity, an attitude borne out by the album's hidden track, All By Myself, a joke song recorded at a party featuring Trey on vocals. The band later claimed it was a song about masturbation, a recurring topic in the world of Green Day.
I didn't think that masturbation was really looked at from the point of view that I was sort of looking at it. You know, it always seemed more people just pulling a pud or something, but I feel like mine was coming from more like lonely guy, no girlfriend, no life, complete loser.
The few people who heard Dookie at these early stages recognized the album's potential. The record was all about the reality of modern American life for the young and the lost. It was a collection of songs written by Billy Joe, someone unafraid to brand himself as idiotic or a stoned outsider. Yet the irony was, Green Day were smart.
From day one, they are a very good pop-punk band who write really brilliant, catchy songs. That's what Green Day are on this planet for. They're not on this planet to be experimental. I mean, a lot of bands make this mistake, think, maybe we should do something really experimental. They can't. You know, Green Day is smart. They know they write great songs with great choruses. And pretty well what they do is a pop-punk kind of thing, which they kind of got some tangents on it later on. But the central core to their sound is already there in the first album. It's really great, sharp, short songs of really good pop-punk.
Green Day were a fusion of pop, punk and rock, and that is a very difficult combination to get right, in the right order. You know, it's like baking a cake. So ultimately, in terms of selling that many records and, you know, really infiltrating the mainstream, you've got to get that combination perfect in order to do that to people that don't buy those kind of records normally.
In April 1994, the rock world was stunned when the Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain took his own life. With his passing, grunge lost its appeal, and the doors were opened for a new breed of bands to storm the charts. They had an entirely different outlook on life, and leading the way was Green Day. They had released Dookie's first single, Longview, just 3 months before Cobain's suicide, the perfect antidote to the damaged psyche of rock music.
The whole Nirvana thing had sort of had its first peak. It had been 2.5 years since Nevermind came out when Dookie came out. I think they were like they stepped into that void where people are saying, what's next? What's coming along? And it was them.
Well, that song came about at Billy's house. He had this riff, just and he played that, and then Mike started going, I started doing that thing, and it's a real menacing quality about it. And you know, so the lyrics, I just wanted something that was like, you know, kind of a schizophrenic kind of thing, where it just, there's this sort of rolling bass line that happens and this sort of smooth feel, and then all of a sudden it just blasts into
Build me up, that's Velcro seat, get me moving. I sure as hell can't do it by myself.
Lyrically, Longview was a postcard sent from the mind of a yawning, channel-hopping, weed-smoking generation, numbed into submission by bad TV and a total lack of motivation, yet angry enough to sing about it. This contrast was reflected in the differences between the laconic apathy of the laid-back verses and the rousing big rock bursts of the choruses. Naturally, it struck a chord with those living similar lives, and the song was soon receiving heavy TV and radio rotation. Not bad for an album whose title was a slang word for baby shit.
Longview was the first single, which was actually a little bit of a surprise, all things considered, and it's not overly sort of poppy really. It's got that kind of tribal drum beat feel, and it's fairly spacious throughout. It's not got the same immediacy as Basket Case, but nonetheless, that's a great single too.
I think Longview didn't reveal anything about the band that we hadn't already suspected. These boys spent their time smoking dope and wanking in their bedrooms. Nice romantic track. But it was, I think Longview was almost like a script from, you know, an episode of Beavis and Butthead. It really was, you know.
And the band that recorded Dookie are a far away band from the band that recorded, you know, 1,000 Hours. And I think that this is when Trey Cool is now in his own, and I think that Billy Joe Armstrong and Mike Dirnt are working with each other very well. In songs like Longview, the three of them are just one unit. You know, there's three separate parts, but they're sitting together as one unit, and it's got the kind of vibe of a band that a band should have. And I think that comes from extensive touring and, you know, those previous years working up to Dookie.
Right before Christmas of '93, there was a really small but kind of cult favorite band called Brent's TV, and they had broken up a year or two before, but they were going to do a reunion show at Gilman. And I think it was either the day before Christmas or the day after Christmas, and it was sort of just like a couple hundred people that knew the band were going to come, and Green Day said they wanted to play, but they would play under a fake name because by this time they were way too big to, we'd be swamped with kids if anybody knew Green Day were playing. So they played under a fake name, and there was about 150 or 200 of us, and it was just kind of, just sort of like family. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew all the words to all the songs of both Brent's TV and Green Day, and we all kind of sang along and sort of reminisced. And there's this, I don't know if anybody said it out loud, but there was this feeling hanging over the whole night that it would never be like this again. And it wasn't, because the next month Dookie came out and MTV got involved, and it was just almost instant sensation. Suddenly, not just Green Day, but our whole scene and everything we'd been doing was under a microscope for the whole country. And it was all, well, like I said, it would never be the same again. It's exciting, but something new had come in, but something really delicate and precious was gone too.
When Dookie was released in January of 1994, Green Day's reputation was just beginning to spread. The band had their critics, mostly their old fans, a large section of the punk community who had turned their back on Green Day for signing to a major. Despite this, the band saw their fan base swell considerably. The striking cartoon-style artwork meant that the new fans could hold their own mini East Bay punk scene in their hands. And here was a record that was more than straight punk rock. Their songs crossed the boundaries between punk, pop, hard rock, and hardcore. Dookie began to sell. Lots.
I think the critical reaction to Dookie was actually very mixed. I think a lot of critics over here were very suspicious of them. And this whole kind of like, we're a punk rock band. It's like, well, no, you're not. You're a bunch of American kids. And they didn't look dangerous enough to be a credible punk rock band over here, or to be perceived as a credible punk rock band over here. Whereas in America, I think critics are actually less cynical until you get to the real kind of the much cooler echelons of music criticism. I think in America, people were kind of much more into it because, ultimately they could see the power of those songs.
We'd already heard some of the songs anyway. They'd been playing them at gigs for a while before. And in a lot of ways, it was the same exact style of music as they'd been playing all along, only with massively better production. But the record never connected with me as much as it did with most people. I don't know why. Maybe it was just my prejudice that it wasn't on my label. It's just something about it. And I don't think it's just because it's a new Green Day record not on my label, because their one they came out with last year, American Idiot, is my favorite of all. And that's both on a major label and fairly different in style. I didn't get as into it as I did the first two records. I mean, it's a great record, a classic record, but something about it doesn't grab me as much. I mean, I don't know why. There's so many great songs on it, and that people still listen to today.
Just a really awesome opening intro, really very simple intro, but you couldn't help but just sort of think, well, what's going on here? And there's a really great intensity to how that song opens up.
It was a perfect 3-minute punk pop song.
When you get to know the song and it kicks into the guitars coming in, I mean, it's just, it's a real rush.
The band's next single from Dookie was to prove to be their trump card. Basket Case was a concise, tongue-in-cheek look at mental instability from the suburban, couch-surfing heartland of America. With a colorful video that was a literal interpretation of the song, Basket Case ruled the airwaves throughout the summer of 1994.
Sometimes I give myself the creep. Sometimes my mind plays tricks on me. It all keeps setting up. Things come right up. Am I just paranoid? Am I just shocked?
Basket Case is such an amazing song because it has hooks running through it from start to finish, and it's a kind of exciting, exhilarating punk pop song, and it's one of those songs you actually don't get bored of listening to, which is actually I think it probably gets better with age, and that is the mark of a good song, and I think it was their kind of real calling card. It's certainly the song I associate with that record.
As I give myself the creep. Sometimes my mind plays tricks on me. It all keeps adding up. Things come right up. Am I just paranoid? Am I just drunk?
Dookie was the album that took Green Day's highly infectious sound to the world. With the album complete, the band hit the road first with the melodic punk legends Bad Religion, then with a series of career-defining festival performances, including Woodstock, Lollapalooza, and their own arena shows.
I think playing all the festivals and being a great live band was great. But there's so many factors why that record did really well. I think there was a feeling that a lot of kind of the kids, you know, the young kids, the Mal kids, the post-Nirvana generation were looking for another band, you know, and Green Day came along. They touched on similar themes, but they touched them in a different kind of way. But I mean, they had that kind of potty humour that's very big in America. But there's also a seriousness to the record as well. They're really good songs. Every single song on the record is like a little mini anthem of its own. I mean, they're really, really dead catchy songs. Really well produced. Great videos as well. MTV picks up on them, which is a very important fact as well. MTV very rarely plays any guitar rock music, no matter what it says. And they picked up on Green Day. That helps a lot. Playing the festivals helped a lot. Woodstock put them right into the mainstream, like it was in proper news in America, where they got covered in mud on the stage. And they actually, you know, there's always one band that comes away to festivals as champions, and they really did. They were the talk of the festival. Although Woodstock was a complete disaster, but Green Day kind of encapsulated everything that was about that festival. You know, they took the piss out of it. It was all over the television. There was mud flying. There was like loads of really funny comments. So they became the band of the festival. Got loads of headlines off that. That bumped the sales of the record up.
Hey, everybody say shut the fuck up and we'll stop playing. Wait, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're done. Goodbye.
There's so many things went right from that year. You know, sometimes when you're in a band, everything goes right. It's not like most times it seems like everything goes wrong. But then that year, everything's like bang, 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 like a load of skills went down. It was right. They delivered a great record, and everything went right. You know, with it, the promotion, the timing, everything was perfect.
A year after its release, the album had sold a staggering 5 million copies worldwide, won numerous awards, and seized the post-grunge zeitgeist. Green Day had entered the major league and were reaping all the financial rewards that comes from international success. Aside from the music, the punk scene had left one other lasting impression on Green Day. As they saw themselves outselling the biggest pop, rock, and rap stars of the day, the band remained humble and self-deprecating, preferring to stick with what they knew best.
I don't know. I don't really succumb to whatever the business has to offer. I just, you know, I do my own thing. You know, it's tough. You know, you get a lot of demons that lurk around and, you know, want you to be something else. But, you know, you just got to put walls up and have the right people around you. And it's about friends and family. You know.
As they got bigger, as the Longview video started to take off, and their audience became more mainstream, they started seeing people at their shows that never would have been at their shows in the past, acting in ways that they weren't used to. And essentially they had reached the mainstream audience, and the mainstream audience sometimes acted like a bunch of jerks at the shows. And they thought, let's get Pansy Division, the openly gay band, to show that, you know, we are not just your normal, typical rock band. There were 2 shows where the promoters did not want us to play, and Green Day said, well, if Pansy Division won't play, then we won't play the gig. And that was a measure of support for us, but it was also a line in the sand for them, saying, you know, if we're big enough to sell all these records, we should be able to do what we want to do on this level. So if we can't even pick our opening band, you know, forget you.
You're just mad because you're in the rain. Well, fuck you! I hope it rains so much you all get stuck.
By having us along, they were saying that, you know, look, we may be on a major label, we may be having our videos on MTV, but we are going to do things our own way.
Something's on my mind. It's been for quite some time. It's shine my mind to you. So Wednesday at the face shattered me for your entrance boring me.
Over the next 10 years, they would go on to release a series of albums that enjoyed huge success, if not quite as stratospheric as Dookie. Their lowest-selling album would still notch sales of 2 million copies. Their 2000 Warning suggested a band maturing into singer-songwriter territory. 2004's American Idiot firmly re-established Green Day as the biggest punk band in the world, and even surpassed the sales of Dookie. They are now the biggest punk band ever, and judging by their latest record, it's a position they have no intention of relinquishing.
Now, I don't think it's remotely surprising that Green Day have staying power, because however snobby you want to be about Green Day, they had better songs than all of their peers.
Well, that's when a band's great, when it doesn't deviate too far from what it's really good at, but it can do loads of different little versions of what it's really good at, and that's what Green Day found. That's their kind of key strength, and they'll be around for long. They're in for the long haul. As long as they want to be there, they'll be there. Green Day.
So any criticisms about whether they're true punk or not, well, maybe that is kind of true punk. You know, they're still doing what they want to do.
You're a jerk, a thug. I can't explain it because I think you're strong. One day, you can't right. Let's all in, fuck off and I'll tell you straight. I'm taking my share in the hands so listen, because you might miss. You're a jerk, a fuck. I can't explain it because I think you suck. I'll take, get right, and tell you to fuck off and die.